Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at an invisible force that is quite literally rewriting the global map: the classroom. Across the globe right now, developed nations are facing some massive, unprecedented demographic shifts. Take Taiwan, for example. Their plummeting birth rate is leading to shrinking schools, merging rural districts, and this looming crisis of an aging workforce. But what if we look beyond the typical models we're used to? What if the specific way a country structures its classrooms, its military, or even its religious institutions, what if that completely rewrites its economic destiny?
Okay, let's dive into this itinerary. We're hitting three drastically different educational paradigms today. First, Israel's education and tech miracle. Second, St. Vincent's regional school system. Third, Indonesia's secular and religious divide. And we'll wrap it all up with some key global takeaways.
To guide us on this journey, today's explainer draws heavily on the deep expertise of Yu-Ping Su. He's a senior diplomat who's actually been stationed across the Middle East, observing these massive systemic shifts firsthand. Through his really unique geopolitical lens, we can see exactly how the mechanics of global education go way, way beyond just simple reading and writing. They are basically the gears driving national security, economic prosperity, and the entire social structure. Section 1. Israel's Education and Tech Miracle. Our first stop is Israel, a country that honestly stands out as a total anomaly in the developed world. Check out this number, 3.01. That is Israel's birth rate, and it is by far the highest in the OECD. It totally defies global trends. Normally, when a country's national income rises, and Israel is sitting at a very healthy $42,000 per capita, birth rates fall. That's just the rule of thumb. But by 2018, the raw number of newborns actually surpassed Taiwan's. Keep in mind, Taiwan has more than twice the total population. And this brilliantly illustrates a stark contrast. The result for Israel is a literal building boom. Because of this massive youth boom, they are aggressively pouring concrete for new hospitals, infant centers, and kindergartens. The demand for teachers is through the roof, creating this incredibly vibrant, growing educational industry. Meanwhile, you have places like Taiwan boarding up empty classrooms and forcing rural schools to merge or shut down entirely. Israel, on the other hand, is building out for a massive next generation. But here's the thing. The real secret to Israel's economy isn't just how many students they have. It's what happens after high school. In Israel, mandatory military conscription is not viewed as a break or an interruption to your education. Actually, it's treated as their highest educational institution. It's a high-intensity training ground. Pretty much everyone, no matter their background, strives to serve, viewing it as a real badge of adulthood and, crucially, a foundational stepping stone for their future careers. Imagine for a second if your high school valedictorians were immediately drafted to become elite government hackers. Well, that's exactly the engine fueling Israel's startup nation status. The military actively scouts high schools, aggressively recruiting the top 5% of the smartest kids. Once they graduate, these elites are placed into highly specialized tech units. Most famously, the Unit 8200 Cyber Division. There, they get world-class training in hacking, cybersecurity, and infrastructure defense. And when their service is up, these highly trained, closely knit veterans regularly band together to launch high-tech startups. It is a crazy efficient, direct pipeline right from high school to the absolute cutting edge of the global tech economy. That being said, Israel's system is definitely not uniform across the board. The source material points out a really deep internal divide. On one side, you have the secular tech education, heavy on math, engineering, and English, which is what drives that whole startup economy we just talked about. But on the other side, you have the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva education. This system is intensely focused on religious Torah study. And because this specific path traditionally skips secular subjects like math and English, it drastically shapes where those graduates end up in the modern tech-driven workforce, often leading many to take on more basic labor roles. Section 2. St. Vincent's Regional Schools System. Okay, let's pivot away from the Middle East and head over to the Caribbean, landing in the beautiful small island nation of St. Vincent. Here, we're looking at a completely different systemic challenge. St. Vincent uses a unified Caribbean exam system rooted in its British history, and wow, it is a highly disciplined gauntlet. From primary school all the way to pre-university, students face this relentless series of rigorous internationally recognized exams, the CTPA, the CCSE, and the CAPE. You can basically think of it as an intense academic marathon set against a backdrop of beautiful beaches. But it works. It incredibly efficiently funnels the brightest students right up into prestigious local secondary schools, getting them ready for the global stage. But here comes the structural dilemma. St. Vincent has an amazing pre-university structure, absolutely, but the island only offers community colleges. It literally lacks a formal, local, four-year university. So what happens to all those brilliant students who just aced their exams? Well, they have to leave. They head off to the UK, the US, or take scholarships in places like Taiwan to actually get their degrees. And because the local job market back home doesn't have a lot of high-end opportunities waiting for them, these incredibly bright, well-educated young adults rarely return. It creates a massive brain drain, pulling the top intellectual talent right out of the nation. Section 3. Indonesia's Secular and Religious Divide. For our final destination, we are moving over to Indonesia. This massive archipelago is grappling with immense cultural diversity and some very rigid social classes based on wealth. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the educational market share here. It reveals a fascinating and frankly heavily fractured split. About 70% of students attend your standard public or secular schools. 20% are enrolled in Islamic religious boarding schools. And then you have the remaining 10% belonging to highly exclusive elite private schools. This three-way split is essentially the bedrock of Indonesia's social hierarchy. When we zoom in a bit, the contrast is pretty staggering. The wealthy demographics generally send their kids to elite private schools. These places are teaching in English and Chinese, using international curriculums that basically create a smooth, direct pathway to global universities in Singapore, the US, or Australia. Conversely, the religious boarding schools, known as pesantren, offer a deeply insular experience. Students live with their religious instructors, focusing intensely on Quranic study and prayer. Traditionally, these schools have entirely omitted secular subjects like math, physics, or English. Although it is worth noting that some are slowly starting to add general subjects now to help their graduates participate in the broader national job market. Adding fuel to this fragmentation is a severe urban-rural divide. In the cities, those elite schools boast luxurious, state-of-the-art facilities. But out in the rural areas, you've got schools lacking basic electricity. The government is facing a monumental challenge trying to balance these resource realities. Take this, for example. A recent presidential initiative introduced a free, nutritious lunch program for students. It's a wonderful idea, but it creates an incredible catch-22. Successfully feeding hungry students consumes so much of the national budget that there is very little funding left over to actually keep the lights on or improve the infrastructure in those struggling rural facilities. Section 4. Global Educational Takeaways. All right. As we wrap up our tour, let's synthesize what we've learned and bring these three very different global mechanisms back to some universal themes. So the crucial point is this. The inputs you put into an education system directly dictate the societal outputs you get. In Israel, integrating military service with elite tech education is the literal driving engine of their economy. In St. Vincent, we see the harsh reality that even a phenomenal early education system is going to struggle if you don't have the tertiary infrastructure to keep your best minds at home. And finally, in Indonesia, we see how a fractured school system, split along the lines of wealth, geography, and religion, can reinforce and lock in deep societal inequality for generations to come. Which brings us right back to you and the systems functioning in your own backyard. Every single society has to walk this tightrope, balancing traditional values, managing tight budgets, and trying to secure future economic survival. So, based on the global tour we took today, take a hard look at the schools in your own community. What is the true long-term cost of the education system in your country? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and we will see you next time.